here. So I was doing some research on your LinkedIn there, and
Hmm.
one thing that stood out to me the most was around. Let me just have a look here. 1 second. Oops, I've lost my notes. That's funny. Um, Here it is. Okay. What does pain isn't love mean?
Oh, I love you asked me that. So the biggest message I share behind like pain isn't love or pain doesn't equal love is the first lesson I learned in life from as a female, the first man that, we get told that your father's to love you, protect you, and all the rest of it, your mother's to help guide you through life. So the first lesson in life where I was led to trust in someone when I didn't know any different was that by loving someone equaled pain, equaled heartache, equaled fear, equaled the unknown. So going through life, from that existence, from that foundational startup, I didn't know any different. So to me, pain equaled love, whatever that may have been when I'm in relationships, or I would put myself in situations because I didn't know any different. And it was such a lesson to learn, to unlearn the lesson of pain equals love.
And starting from that, the genesis of being a child, and and same thing with a man, having your mother as kind of the example of a female in your life, and then your father as the male in your life. If you're comfortable sharing, would you mind sharing a bit about, I guess, your upbringing and how you got to the point of where you are now, and a bit about what your mission is, maybe, and we can start from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a household where violence was normal. That chaos became so normalized that when things were calm, I felt more on edge. And it was an ongoing. There were episodes where child safety was called, where things were covered up, where it was almost I was silenced because if I was told, if you say anything, if you to go and tell anyone this, Janelle, no one's going to believe you. So from such an early age, I was either blamed or shamed just for existing. And a child is never at fault. It doesn't matter what gender you are, a child is never to be blamed for their parents' choices that they make. And you should be able to live a life where you feel safe. But unfortunately, there's so many of us that don't. So I, at 16, became a child of the state. Now, what that means is that my mother and my grandmother took me to a government agency and said it was no longer safe for Janelle to live at home. Um, Her father and her going through all this stuff, and so they set me up with in a like here they do like it's a I think it was youth allowance or something, some sort of like Centrelink payment that came through as a 16 and a half year old and put me into TAFE to become a hairdresser. And I lived in a share house where it was a party central, and for a 16-year-old it was terrifying, but I had to exist, right? I had to keep going. I had this like internal dialogue, like I wanted a better tomorrow, that never was good enough for me. And so I started this healing journey and I went down this rabbit hole. And later on in life, I actually got into a relationship with a man that probably was the worst grooming and DV situation I've ever experienced. He had pulled almost the blinkers over my eyes, and I couldn't see what was right, what was wrong, what was real, and what wasn't. And the devastation of that relationship ending in like domestic violence and police being involved, and him having court orders put on him where he actually had 70 breaches of his DV orders. Now, something that is really astonishing to me that I didn't know until recently. If a perpetrator goes to court and pleads guilty, they just get let back out. And that was just like, I was like, are you serious? Like, that's why he could find me and that's why I went through everything. So, on the back of that, I was like, no, this isn't enough. I need to heal more. I'm worthy of more than this. I need to be able to help others. And I started writing my memoir. And it was cathartic at first, you're like trying to put your words on paper and go through your healing process. And then it became, no, actually, this is my way of giving those who feel like they're suffering alone a voice. They're not alone. Whether you're male or female, you're not going through this alone. It can feel so isolating. And that journey of healing and showing up with compassion, I honestly believe we all have to learn to lead with compassion. Empathy and sympathy is all wonderful, but being a leader in a compassionate form, you show up and you hold space for others to have the space to heal. And that's why I started my non-for-profit charity, Rise and Thrive, because I believed and identified that when I was an adolescent, lost in the system, didn't get the support I needed, the difference is when someone's showing up for me at that age group to what I would have gone through in my adult years would have been so significantly different.
Wow. And I'm sorry that you went through all that. That's horrifying. And those people that do go through those kind of things, and again, I think everyone has varying degrees of things they go through when they're younger. Some is more emotional, some is a combination of both, and some is, I mean, it's all bad, right? And I feel, and this is a little bit of a left turn from the conversation or the thing you mentioned then, but I feel like often when we enter relationships, specifically with an intimate other, we are attracted to things that we experienced, or rather we had from our parents to one degree or another. And we feel like those things are, I'm just attracted to that. That's just what I like. I like this or I like that. And then for anyone who's gone through some sort of healing and some sort of journey of going to a place of understanding how that happens and why that happens, you start to realize that the things that you're attracted to aren't always good for you, right? They're not always a positive thing to lean towards. So how much of the journey of that relationship that you had to maybe where you are now, have you learned that the things that maybe, you've seen from other people and also in yourself and observed in others, where attraction is actually something that's not positive for you? And what does someone do in that situation, if you have any, I guess, words of advice or thoughts?
That is a really, really interesting question. And I would like to relate it back to dating sites, right? When we're scrolling through, right, we're swiping, we have a power in our hand to swipe left or right to just what we're, a picture we're attracted to. Like yes, no, yes, no. And then you get caught up in what I call like the love bombing stage of doing that. You're like, this is exciting. This feels good. This is something different to what I felt. But what I think what people get and what I did as well, you forget about the bad feelings that come from the high. Whenever there's a high, there's a low. And it's almost like attraction can almost be treated as an addiction. Like, what are we chasing? What do we want that we aren't showing up and giving to ourselves? So I think that's a really important, like I learned that going, okay, I thought I was at the best place in my life to find a partner at the time when I did meet the perpetrator. He was charismatic. He was very, everyone was like, yeah, he's a champ, whatever, because he had this charisma about him that just sort of drew you in. But little did I know, he wasn't drawing everyone in, he was drawing me in. And post that relationship breakdown, I had to really look in those ugly parts of myself. And we all have them. But looking at them makes us feel really uncomfortable. And I had to take that accountability of those parts and learn to forgive myself for the choices I've made in survival mode and just sit with myself and sit with those thoughts and ask myself, why do I think I landed there? How could I help someone else not land there? And I chose to stay single for a long time post that breakup because I didn't want to just jump into the next. Because by jumping into something without finalizing what was, you're carrying that weight. It's like that intergenerational cycle that keeps coming through and keeps playing out in life.
And a scary thought that I've had to myself is when I've entered into relationships where it wasn't something that I consciously wanted, maybe emotionally or unconsciously. The scary thought is, what part of me wants this drama? What part of me actually wants this emotional chaos, you know, and then in the moment you're like, oh, this is so hard, this is so annoying, and this is like the worst thing ever. And of course, I'm not discounting the fact that sometimes things happen that you are genuinely a victim. I'm
Mm-hmm.
referring to when you go back and you keep the cycle going. And
Mm.
I'm speaking for myself here, and I'm like, the scary thought is, what part of me actually wants this? And in the
Mm.
moment, you're like to yourself, oh, this is just crazy. But then you notice yourself when you become more aware and more conscious of your patterns, your emotional patterns, and also in relation to someone else, you start to notice that you will do certain things that will trigger that from another person, almost like you're unconsciously asking for it. So it's a
So
really
who
scary
sets
thought
that
to have,
up?
but it's,
Sorry to cut you off, but
well,
who sets that up?
I mean, I believe that happens from your emotional home, what you're used to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you have patterns that you. So okay, a kid comes in the world, right? We all have our own temperaments, our own proclivities, and you know, you can use that, you know, based on Myers Briggs, or we can use that based on personality types, or just
Mm-hmm.
spirituality, who someone is, whatever it might be. But if there's a certain environment where behaviors are, I guess, rewarded, you know, like if you, an example of this might be if you're in an environment as a kid where you're ignored when you're showing up to your parent with patience, kindness, and love. So let's say, for example, you're like, "Hey, mom, can I have this, please?"
Mm-hmm.
Or like you're being very polite, and they ignore you. But then after like 10 times of doing that, then your response is you start to throw a tantrum, you start to throw shit around, you scream, you yell, like maybe you even hit your mum or you hit your dad. Like you know, like as a kid, you do that sometimes then you just learn if that happens over 3 or 4
Mm-hmm.
years and the brain is very plastic, as we all know, then that becomes a pattern, and then when you enter a relationship you're naturally looking for that. I know I'm
Mm-hmm.
preaching to the choir here, so to speak, but it's like I think so much of that is so then when you enter a relationship, let's just go full circle with that. You enter a relationship and your say your other significant other, someone you meet someone, right? You meet someone online, you meet them in person, whatever, and they're very patient and gentle and very, and you're like, this is boring. This relationship is boring. Like, and then you realize it's actually boring. You're just used to someone, not giving you attention when you're being that version of yourself that is your higher self, quote unquote, or your most loving, most patient self. But then when you throw a tantrum, then maybe they're unattracted and they move away, and then they're the bad person. But then you meet someone who then validates that behavior, then you have the cycle
Mm-hmm.
continue. So the attraction, you can't attract something that is an opposite of that. You attract the same. As much as we like to think opposites attract, it really is the two positive ends, or the
Yeah.
positive and the negative, so to speak, that loop together.
It's the addiction of what became our normalization of how we got attention.
Yeah,
And there's so much more of that now for teenagers. So the next generation of adults, I feel, are going to be struggling so much more than what we are because we did not have, well, I did not have devices in my hands from a child. I didn't have a device till
how old
I
are you,
was, I'm
if you want me to
41,
ask you?
nearly 42.
Okay, so I'm
Yeah.
30, and I got my first phone when I was 12, but it was a little like Nokia phone that you play
Yep.
snakes on. So I didn't
I
I didn't have. Go for it.
I had the Nokia brick when I was a teenager. Like it was a brick where you had to like go to get a letter. You had to go dot 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 dot. Like, it was really difficult, right?
Same
Whereas
same with mine.
now the kids to entertain, so parents can still live their social lives, so parents can have their work meetings, so parents can do whatever they need to do. A device, a laptop, a iPad, a phone, whatever it may be, gets put in their little hands. How many times have you had conversation with an adult that has children or grandchildren that says to you, "Oh my God, they're so smart. They can navigate technology way better than me." And they think they're gifted. But it's just evolution. But what we have a responsibility to do that we are not showing up and doing is the emotional awareness. We need EQ to come with the IQ of technology because like tracking and like so stalking and tracking and all that is a criminal offense, right? You can get locked away for it. So you have apps like Snapchat and all the rest of it that are so much there's so much good and there's so much bad from any platform you sort of look at as how you get taught on what's a safe boundary. We're not showing and teaching and leading by example of what is safe. What is a boundary where you know what this is family time. Me too, as the adult, my phone's going to go down and I'm going to be present with you right now because you deserve my attention. So like that tantrum you're talking about, even in a relationship, you can see it play out in relationships too. When your significant other is on their device and they go, "Oh, I'm doing work," but you can look over and I might just be like scrolling through socials. People mask it and they don't even realize they're doing it. So we all need to take accountability and start leading by that modeling behavior that we want. Otherwise, like that next generation is going to be so disconnected. Like they've gone through a pandemic where their mobile devices were all of our only forms of communication. And then you put in a relationship with that and you're trying to start understanding it all. And it's how do you peel that back?
So I had a guest on the day before yesterday around bullying, and he goes
Mm,
into schools and he speaks to schools all across the country in Australia. And he was saying, and this is in essence, what I got from what he was saying, which is a lot of the mental health and bullying issues that we have in schools, often the seed or the antecedent factor of that is self-esteem.
mm-hmm.
Now, if you're again, we can go through the phone stuff for a long time, and I've had my own battles with that. I think we all do. I've just gone through a process of dumbifying my phone actually, and I'm just going to show you really quickly.
How
Where
do you
basically my home
dumbify a
screen
phone?
now, I can go through that with you if you like. So this is my home
Yeah.
screen right now. Let's see if it goes there. There's just
Yeah.
literally that list there when I open my
Mm-hmm.
phone. But that came from a place of this insatiable hunger and endless need to be always consuming something, right?
Mm,
And it's like this feeling of, and so a bit about my story in the past when I was growing up, I had severe social anxiety to the point where, I'd speak to someone, I'd be blushing on my face and I'd be stumbling over my words. And I had this, like we all do, I had this drive or this need or this want to connect with people. And I had all these things inside of me that wanted to be expressed and shared with the world. But I had this chatter in my head or this emotional like I was like what are those like stray jacket of
mm-hmm.
social anxiety on me, and that lasted a long time. So my solution for that was to use alcohol, and so I used alcohol, and that's how I found my validation. And then that obviously leads to a certain crowd when you're binge drinking on weekends, and so that began the kind of the cycle of, I wouldn't say addiction, but running from my emotions using something external locus
Mm-hmm.
of control, right? As opposed to, what's this emotion, where's it coming from, how can I deal with this? I was never really taught that, right? And I did teach myself that eventually when I started that process when I was 14 by reading Tony Robbins books and things like that, but it's very hard to do by myself as a kid. But so that naturally led to things like porn, and as a kid back then, and also I think more now, it's just, it's normal, like kids just watch porn, whatever, it's just a normal part of growing up, whatever.
Yep.
But there's so many, and we can go into this, there's just so much attached to that leads to something else that's not positive. But anyway, so
Mm-hmm.
that whole journey led to this feeling of chasing, and we all do this to a degree or another, but some are worse than others. Worse meaning they have it harder because of, I guess, their personality type or their proclivity. But this insatiable hunger for dopamine, for that stimulation, for that feeling. So I'm sitting on my phone a few days ago, and I'm watching YouTube videos, and my rationalization in my mind is, oh, I'm educating myself. I'm watching podcasts on, neuroscience, and reading and listening to books on this and that. But it always has to be playing. Meanwhile, my partner's trying to get my attention. She's asking like me questions. I'm got my earphones in my head, in my ears, sorry, and then she's trying to speak to me. And I'm getting annoyed because she's trying to speak to me. And I'm just so it's like I'm chasing something in my life that isn't the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I came across this video through this process. It's funny how that comes full circle, and it's like how to dumbify your phone. So I downloaded some apps and basically deleted all the social media apps off my phone, which is really hard to do because my work's involved in that. But I found ways around it, and I blocked off the time for only a certain part of the day for me to use social media. And it's been really hard. It feels like I'm losing something. Like I'm losing, like, oh, like why can't I just go on YouTube and watch that video? Why can't I just scroll for a bit and, just like I'm being punished or something like a kid? But I remind myself, it's like, this is not punishment. This is actually, you're actually experiencing life. What's the point of life if you can't experience it? What's the point of living if you can't live? Like scrolling isn't living. That's it's a second degree living of someone else's life. So I went through and I deleted all my social media apps. I downloaded this application. I can share it all with you after or
Mm.
whenever, and I just have that list there now. And that list is just those apps that I use. And then when I want to use the more advanced features of my phone, I do that in the afternoon or when I need to.
I think that is so important for a lot of people to hear. And like
Yeah.
there's what 11 years, nearly 12 years difference between you and I. And I know myself is we live in a fast-paced, dispensable life. That real human connection isn't as attractive as the next best thing.
Yeah.
So, like our parents' era would have been like the whole saying, keeping up with the Joneses. You know, your neighbor went and brought a new car. So, guess what? Next week, I'm going to go out and look at getting a new car. Whereas now, it's like, it's there. Bang, bang, bang. Like every time you open a phone or every time you do everything, but there's this constant fear of we're not measuring up enough. And like I can speak firsthand right now, something that I'm going through, and it is in the world of non-for-profit space, in the world of the work I'm doing. Now, I work with adolescents, so it's not something that I'm going to go and broadcast what I do on, right? It's something that I do heart-led and I show up and I'm working within schools and doing everything. Now, it's a confidentiality. I don't get out in public and share all of that. And now tomorrow night I'm become a finalist for an award for the individual of the year here on the Sunshine Coast. I saw the
Congratulations.
thank you, but I saw the finalists list, right? And I personally was going through it, dun, 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 and I'm like, how the fuck did I get there? Sorry, swearing, but you
It's all right. It's
you, like,
okay.
you go through those imposter syndromes, right? Because you're constantly measuring yourself up to somebody else, and how we
Yeah.
feel about ourselves doesn't mean that that's how someone who looks at us like they're grateful for how we are showing up. And when you're in a space where you show up talking about domestic and family violence, when you actually are having those real conversations that so many people live in the shadows and don't come forward in, you're not going to get all the likes and shares and comments as someone who might share something where people are going to get outward support from. So
Hmm.
it's almost like I show up every single day to a silent audience. And there's times where you feel like, am I doing the right thing? And it's not, I don't doubt what I'm doing because I wholeheartedly believe in what I'm doing and I see the results from it within the work I do. But like from what you've just said then is it's that addiction, right? What when I watch a YouTube video, who's gonna engage in a YouTube video on this and this? Or who's showing up in real space talking about real conversations? Who's showing up making me feel good in the moment? That's the life we've all been like guided to be living. So you get someone like myself and like how what we're doing now, a real conversation, and it makes people feel uncomfortable. People are either going to be like, yeah, I hear you both, like, woo, or they're going to be like, oh, I'm listening, but I don't think I want to stay here anymore because we're talking about things that everyone goes through, but no one outwardly speaks that much about.
And speaking of which, when it comes to, so DV would be the acronym domestic violence, and DFV, domestic family violence.
Mm-hmm.
So my thoughts around the approach of that. So where does the when it comes to personal responsibility versus, I mean, the family side of things, I understand that when someone's under 18, it's very hard to, you can't give responsibility to a teenager or to someone younger because they're still growing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But where does, I guess, what is a solution to that? Is it more of a government or state intervention in your opinion? Is it less of that? Is it more personal responsibilities, educating kids? Like, what do you feel about the solution is for domestic violence and domestic family violence?
So I've sit with this wholeheartedly every single day, and I ask myself this every single day. I don't it is almost like you're running a race and here's the finish line. But then a new law gets placed and that finish line keeps moving. So we're constantly trying to chase what the government is installing. So with that hierarchy of what they feel is the right or wrong thing to do, it makes it really hard for inroads to be made. If you're asking me wholeheartedly what I feel like, it's grassroots. We need to get at that really important age. Parents don't like to feel exposed because not for fear of, well, it is fear of what they may be doing, but it's also for that unhealed wounds of what was done to them that they haven't healed. So that's where that cycle of intergenerational abuse and trauma comes in. And that's the exact thing that I work in that space of. We don't have to put blame onto what actions have been done. It's not to me. I hate the stigma around it's a men's problem. It's not a men's problem. It's not a woman's problem. It's a human problem. It's a violence problem. So the stigmas that are attached to DV and DFV, that needs to change. Like we now can have a more comfortable conversation about transgender, about sexuality, even about rape. Like in the media now, people are so much more comfortable in just having a conversation, showing up and talking real about it. But you think all of these years, when it comes to domestic family violence and DV, there's still such a strong stigma attached to it, whether you're a perpetrator or a victim of it. And I think every perpetrator at some point in their life was also a victim of it. Yeah.
It's a very tough one. So if you had, I mean, let's just throw a number out there. Let's say you had $10 million to throw at this,
Mm-hmm.
at domestic violence and domestic family violence. What would be some of the things you would do?
Implement programs into the schools, get external facilitators. It is not a teacher's problem, it's not a teacher's responsibility. We need to be able to have the information given and the resources available. There's so many people that aren't trauma trained. There's a lot of people that are trauma informed, but they're not so trauma from an evidence based perspective. And it's really, really crucial at this time where we are with so many adolescents with like committing suicide or self harming. And self harm comes in so many different versions now. And the knowledge that parents don't have of understanding the risk factors and what mental health is and how serious it is, it needs to be taken seriously. I would throw a lot of money into let's develop programs that get implemented throughout all schools. Now, this is flexi schools, state schools, private schools, and the schools like, Montessori and all the other different versions of education.
Yeah.
Because until we can heal the patterns or look and identify within ourselves what is safe, what isn't safe, what's okay, what's not okay, who do we go to and speak to? How do we know that they're going to listen? I would start there. And then a
This
lot of
might
campaigns. No, you're fine. Go.
this this might be an uncomfortable question, but what about the perpetrators, the ones that do it?
Yeah.
You mentioned before that these individuals have had it done to them in most cases.
Yeah.
What do you do with them? Do you do the same thing we're doing right now? What are we doing right now? I mean, you
So
mentioned that they get let off,
yeah,
they admit being guilty. So what do we do with these
I had a very
individuals?
interesting conversation the other night with someone who works within the prisons and has had so many years of experience within it. And I literally asked him, I said, tell me, what do you see when you look at these people who, and I call them people, right? We're all people, we're humans. And he described it as though there's some that there's no lights on. You look in their eyes and you see darkness. Whatever hope of their thinking that they're worthy is gone. They don't care anymore. It's almost like they've checked out. And then you find the ones that are grey, slightly grey, not quite black. And you want to try to help them. But the resistance in the fight because they don't know anything different, right? And then you have people that they're so scared. They're so scared. They didn't want to be where they're at and it's a slippery slope. So what do we do there? I guess we still show up. We show up still with compassion. We don't have to condone the actions that they take. People end up hurting people. So I'm not condoning poor behavior, but I'm also not saying I think everyone deserves a chance to do their healing work. But how do we do that? Should they be in a safe space where they're not a risk to themselves or others? Is that the answer? I don't know.
So my opinion on this is that so we'll have shared humanity no matter what we've done. We share something in common, which is we're human. We experience emotions. We experience life. We have life flowing through us. Now, responsibility doesn't mean this doesn't mean that responsibility can't be given to someone that does the wrong thing, and it doesn't mean that praise can't be given to someone doing the right thing. They still exist. But if someone is unwilling, we also have I guess, a responsibility not to force something on someone who doesn't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But then there is consequences, and I think that's very fair. But like here's, like it's very clear. It's like here's option because we'll have a choice, no matter what we say. Like I don't have a choice. I'm stuck in a situation, or this person did this to me. We always have a choice on how we feel and how we respond to things, right?
Yep.
So individuals, they're in a certain place. They made a choice based on what they knew and circumstances.
Hmm.
But we should give everyone choice. It's like, okay, you have a choice now. You've done this. Here's the consequences of this. You have a choice now. Here's an opportunity for you. Do you want to work through this, or even
Hmm.
finding a way to phrase it in a more empowering way for that individual and where they're at in the stage of their life? So in the court system, it might be a case of um, you're gonna have to do some time, or maybe it's like you have to do some time, but while you're doing time, you have a choice to work on this if you want to change it, and here's what you can do. And then it might be
Yep.
a program of some sort. I don't know if they have that right now,
They
but I
do.
feel like they're
All prisons have programs. Yeah.
right. So they do have a choice to go into something and do something about it.
My biggest thing that I peel back from is like, why do we have to wait as a society to when they're an adult to do that work to teach accountability? Why
Yeah,
can't we get the grassroots and go, we're identifying and this is what a safe behavior is, this is what is an unsafe behavior. Go past the consent stuff. Rip the band-aid off.
yeah,
Like you said before, they're all, like you watch porn when you're whatever. Teenagers watch porn so much now, and what do they see? They see like aggressive porn,
violence.
hardcore porn, strangulation, bestiality. There's so much, right? There's so much violence within pornography. What they don't realize is that's staged and it's not normal. But
Yeah,
screen time is so normalized now, not just to adolescents, but to adults. So I sort of I want to shift the responsibility. Like, yeah, adults that have been hurt, who have hurt people, they need to take accountability. If they don't want to make change in their life, take accountability of, you know what, I've messed up and I don't want to get any help. Stay where you are. That's where you deserve to be. But if you want to do your work, show up and do it. Lead by example.
absolutely. And for those listening now or in the future, what are some things I guess we can look at or even just inquire into when it comes to healing these parts of ourselves or ourselves, if you want to put it in some way? And again, I want to phrase that there's never a point where like I'm healed now and I'm like this
Mm-hmm.
perfect person, because life happens to and from us, right?
Yep.
But I guess just for those listening and to summarize, what are some things people can do to look at going on that journey? It could be a case of, seeing someone. I think that's always a good idea. But I guess if someone doesn't have the resources, let's just imagine that they don't have the resources, they have limited time. Um, what are some things that people might be able to do?
And it's going to be really hard for them to do that if they're not getting a guide or if they don't have the resources to do it. But the first thing I would say is we always have a mirror, right? Whether we have a phone or a window or a mirror in a bathroom. So it doesn't matter where you are. Take a few seconds. Don't just glimpse at yourself, look at yourself and ask yourself the question of, am I being as kind as I need to be to me? And those people who can't, or those people who have made poor choices, or those people who are struggling, they're going to find that question so uncomfortable. So why? Why is it uncomfortable? Everyone deserves to be kind to themselves. From learning how to be kind and how to forgive themselves for the choices that they've made in survival mode or in that fight or flight, that is your first entry point of being able to start, do your journaling, go for a walk. It's all those simple things that people can tell you to do. How many times has everyone heard, do box breathing or do figure of eight breathing? You ask someone who's going through a stressful situation, they're going to tell you to get stuffed. They don't want to do that. So little things like if you have chili or you have a lemon or you have like ice or something, like when you're going through a heightened state, you need to shock yourself back into your body. So some people put a rubber band on their wrist, like, and they'll flick it to bring themselves back into where they are. There's so many different ways you can do it. I guess the best thing is about leading with kindness to self, asking yourself, if we're talking about someone who's done something bad, they're going to be hurting for even what they've done. And if we're talking about someone who's received pain from someone, they're going to feel shame, they're going to feel fear, they're going to feel unworthy. So that same question relates to both. Am I being kind enough to myself?
And recognizing that you're worthy of forgiveness.
Absolutely,
That's a
you
hard thing
are.
to do.
It's
And it's like
one of
we've
the
all done
hardest.
things that yeah, we've all done things that we regret, and we've done like why I did that for. That was a serious thing. Like when I was drinking and I was a teenager, like I did some shit that I wouldn't even care to mention. It's just like what I'd care to mention, but it's like it's
Mm-hmm.
just so like I'm just so ashamed, and right, it's like there has to be a process there of forgiving yourself, and all you can do is, and it's like I don't want to make a Christian thing because I'm not in that field or a theological kind of thing, but it's like you can repent, which means that you do seek to set right what you've done wrong, and that can be done through changing one, not changing oneself, but healing oneself, I feel.
I think that is much more of an important statement to make than anything else. You don't need to externalize it either, and we need to bring it back into ourselves. And we all make mistakes. You know what? I've made more than what most people ever would. Like, I lived in survival mode for so long. Decisions I made, like, yeah, it's tough. And I had to learn to, when I'd feel the shame and I'd be like, far out, like, why did I do those things? And it's not until now where I've gone through that part. And like you said before, it's never over. We're never perfect. We're perfectly imperfect. And I've just learned that even in my triggered states now, or when I have that, it's almost like you get this little person on your shoulder here that's like, hey, remember me? Remember what you did last time you were here? Like, let's go that self sabotage again. And you have to really bring it back and go, hang on, I know what this is. That's not healthy. Let's go, yep, acknowledge it's there. It's when you don't give acknowledgement to that, they're going to get louder until you listen. It brings it back to the tantrum throwing, right? So the sooner you can acknowledge the pattern that you're doing that's unhealthy, the sooner you can move away from it.
Let's speak about parents and I guess what parents can do. So for me, I don't have kids, right? And there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely a fear of, and I think every parent has this to one degree or another, even when they have kids. It's like this fear of passing on, or maybe it's just me, but passing on, my trauma or my things onto my child. And like
Mm-hmm.
I see how sometimes I might respond to certain situations with my partner, with people, and I think to myself like, oh, like I really need to look at that because I see myself doing that over and over again. And if I'm going to do that, so even another thing is like to if you have pets, for example, right? And it's like, and again, not trying to be perfect here, but like if you have get frustrated at a pet for just being a pet, which is like the other day, right? For example, the cat jumped onto the counter and was eating the food that my partner prepared, and I got really pissed off, and I just like grabbed the cat and just threw him on the ground. Not throw, but just like on the ground.
Yeah.
I was really pissed off, and I was like, "That's really me. Like, why'd you do that for?" And I'm like, "Oh, because he's on the counter. Like, I'm disciplining him, kind of thing." And I'm like, "Oh, shit, that's not good. That's like, I know it's so small. And it's like, oh, that's not that bad. But if that was a child, right? Like, I pass on that anger. I pass on, and I feel like there is space for discipline. It doesn't need to
Mm.
come from a place of you don't need to to push or put forward your emotions that are your emotions onto someone else because you think it's disciplining them. Discipline them can be separate from emotions. So I guess long-winded question of you know what can parents do, either coming parents or think about becoming parents and or are parents. What can they do to not pass on their trauma and not fall into feeling guilty, I guess is a way to put it.
I don't know one parent in this world that doesn't feel guilty at one point in time. But in saying that, like what I lived through, before I even fell pregnant, I was like, this cycle ends with me. I made a decision, and I'm not perfect. I yell. I have strong boundaries, so I don't have to use any form of physical abuse or anything like that. I have a strong boundary. Always lead with boundaries and consequences, and I hold myself accountable with my own boundaries as well. And because we've seen a whole generation that have come through now where all the parks got all the like concrete was removed, for example, underneath the park swings and all the
Yeah.
rest of it, and it's now this like soft spongy stuff, right? And a child goes through something now, and we've been told that we have to almost remove them from the situation. They're not learning resilience. Kids are going, oh, you know what, someone poked me. Oh, that's abuse. You abused me. You picked on me. That's a bully. And so then mum
Yeah.
and dad get loud and they come into the schools, and it causes so much problems. Whereas I think as a parent, and I can speak firsthand from what I've gone through in my parenting as well, showing up where your child is in that moment and having the conversations of asking them, okay, so you felt uncomfortable here. Tell me what led to that. Like, but with whatever age group they are, speak for it. I think a lot of, what they call the geriatric parent, so to speak, now is different because I had my children when I was 24. So I had them young. So when you have parents that are a lot older who have heard all these self-help books and what you should and shouldn't do, how to heal his wounds, her wounds, all the rest of it, it's just about showing up and being present where they're at. Don't talk to them with the jargon of an adult. They're not an adult. They are a child. They are still learning. Then they learn we have to model the behaviors that we want them to show up with. And we don't always get it perfect, but just own it when we don't. Like I can give an example I've got teenagers, right? So they like pushing boundaries. The social, the late nights at school holidays, they want to go out. One's about to get a driver's license. And so there's a lot going on as a teenage parent, a single teenage parent. And it's more teaching not just consent, but I always tell both of them, what I want you to do is ask yourselves, if this happened, if something horrible happened to you, how that made you feel, would you like somebody else to feel that way? Would you like to be the one to hurt somebody else?
What do they say?
No. No one wants to hurt. And that's the whole human existence, right? No, none of us will put our hand up and go, yep, hit me. Go for it. I want to feel that. Like I deserve pain. Like no one wants to feel that. People will say those things and get like that are usually after a pattern of abuse. There's a cycle and prolonged poor behavior. So I think with parents, we need to take accountability of our own actions. Stop blaming the teachers. Stop blaming the systems. We need to look at ourselves. We really do. And before even we become a parent, like you'll never be perfect. Forget about, the perfect house and the perfect
White
child.
picket fence.
I'll tell you right now, every single one of us eats, sleeps, shits, has tantrums, smiles, laughs, wants to enjoy life. Doesn't matter if you're a baby, a child, an adult, or you're elderly. We all have those same human existing behaviors. How can you show up, be more compassionate? And I think as a parent, we need to lead with a boundary and a consequence. Whatever consequence that is, I'm not saying I do not condone abuse. I do not condone manipulation. If it's a cycle of, I don't want have happened to me, happen to my children, ask yourself, how can I then lead with not band-aiding everything? We want to give our kids every opportunity that we didn't have. And it's a hard juggle. Like, I don't think there's one perfect recipe, and I'll own that. Like, I'm not going to sit here and go, follow these steps and you're going to be the perfect parent and have the perfect child, because it's not reality. But I think if we can take responsibility and accountability of our own mistakes, not project it onto somebody else, not to have the tantrum, like you've spoken about a few times, when we're not getting what we want, because our little people watch that and they mirror that.
And as within, so without. How you feel within will project outwards, and then a perfect manifestation of that, I feel, for myself and for those listening as well, and we can speak to this. When you're in a relationship with someone, that's a perfect example of how you show up, and not talking about the first 2 months when things are like you're in that passionate love phase as opposed to companionate love phase, where everything's all like sunshine rainbows. But after 6 months, when you're living with someone, or even after a year when you're living with someone, and you're like you're pushing each other's buttons, like how do you respond to that? Because children, from what I've seen from my parents and from my environment around me, children will push on those buttons 10x what your partner will, or what anyone else around you will. So how do you respond to the situation? And it's like, and here's another thing as well, right? So with this podcast, right, there's times when I do this podcast where I feel really tight, really uncomfortable, and like that social anxiety would come back up, right? And it occasionally does all the time. And what changed for me was how I chose to see my experience. And I know like it's lesson as old as age, right? But it's like, how am I choosing to see what this is? And how am I choose to see this when this anxiety comes up? It means, oh, great, I'm ready to have a podcast. Or like, what are those times when it happens? The trigger is, okay, then what are the times, what can I remind myself about myself that I've done in the past that can like show myself that I'm okay with this, that I'm safe, I'm fine.
Mm.
Like, what about, when this situation happened and I handled that really well, or when I spoke in front of 20, 30 people and I was comfortable. What about this situation? So I just start listing off these examples. Now, coming back to what I was saying, it's the same as when your partner triggers you. And I'm saying this to myself as well. I'm not saying I do this all the time, but I certainly try to. It's like when your partner's triggering you, when your kids are triggering you, when someone's triggering you, it's like, oh, great, an opportunity for me to become more aware, to become more enlightened, to learn more about myself. Oh, awesome. You have an opportunity to be able to step up. So it's like, are you going to choose to take that, or are you going to walk away from it?
Question is, are you? Are you not? And I don't, even yourself, even myself, in any given moment, like my partner, if you asked him, like, yeah, he calls himself the fire engine who tries to put out the fire because I'm very strong on putting these boundaries in place, and the boundaries exist because of like
Mm.
what you just touched on how do you know when you're getting triggered? Like, what's the right thing to do? Are you going to react here? Are you not going to react here? If you don't say something in this space, are you going to get walked all over? Is all those bad things that happen to you going to happen again? What choice are you going to make? How are you going to communicate?
For me, it's the opposite as far as, well, at least I think it's the opposite. When I become, when I go into survival mode, I
Yep.
shut down and I'll be really harsh with my boundaries and not in a loving, compassionate way. So I think, all boundaries and all, well, not all, but when you're with someone in an intimate relationship, I
Mm-hmm.
think boundaries should be put forth with compassion. There's
There's the
compassion,
word compassion, 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 right? I love it.
and the key difference to me is when I'm triggered by something, I'll go into a place of, I'll become cold and like, no, I'm not doing that, as opposed to like,
Mm.
I hear where you're coming from and like I understand, but for me, this is what I need right now. Does that make sense? Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. But it's like, no, I'm not doing this. Like that's because growing up as a kid, like I had experiences with myself and my own personality type was like when I felt like someone was trying to get something from me emotionally, like they needed me emotionally, I'd feel smothered and like I'd feel, what's that word they use in avoidant anxious attachment theory? It's like when you feel smothered by someone. Anyways, the term I'm using is basically I'd feel emotionally smothered. So when someone does that to me, I'd just shut down as a way to keep myself safe. So that's another thing as well. It's like if you're, so people think, oh, boundaries, I got strong boundaries. I can say no to anyone. It's like, well, how are you delivering that? Like, would you want someone to have that harshness that you put forward to them? Same question that you ask your kids.
Mm.
And same thing that I did when I was a teenager. I used to be really harsh. Like people would ask my feedback on something, I give them the exact answer with no filter whatsoever. I'm like, well, I'm doing them a favor because they wanted a feedback. How's that dress look? Oh, it's ugly. It's like there's room for compassion and honesty and integrity all at the same time. Doesn't mean you have to abdicate one for boundaries.
I think it's a really important thing to touch on as well because it's more, and that's active listening.
Yeah.
So why someone thinks that they're putting a boundary in, why do people boundaries? Because they're not feeling seen, they're not feeling heard, not feeling respected. What they are receiving from somebody else is making them feel under threat or triggered in some shape or form. You might retract and go, you know what, I'm closed out, I don't want to know anymore. Some people may then also go, I need more. I'm going to keep pushing because right now you've closed off and I'm going to keep chasing you. So it's like a tug of war, right? And I just think what's so important is in that moment, if you can notice before that trigger happens, instead of trying to over explain why you've put a boundary in place, actually recognize it within yourself and go, oh, this is what it is. It's actually a me problem. If I'm not explaining why this is hurting me, how can you expect somebody else to know?
And that comes from practice. Again, you spoke about journaling, you spoke about
Mm,
seeing someone. There's so many things. And meditation, I know it's been overused so much, but for me, when I
yeah.
don't meditate, I notice straight away I go back. I'm easily able to go back into survival mode. So it's like, what are
Mm.
those things you can do to regulate your nervous system and live in parasympathetic, as they say, rather than sympathetic?
And it's almost it's hard because the word self-discipline comes to mind, right?
Yeah.
Discipline is discipline. It doesn't matter if it's coming from you or from somebody else. If that word discipline means, like you said before, even with your phone, you chose to put your phone on the way that it is now. and you felt you was a form of discipline in a way, and you had to remind yourself this isn't a bad thing, this is a choice. And so I also think self-discipline is an overused term, because when we associate a negative word to what's meant to be a positive experience, it neutralizes it.
And a reframe for, again, so I think that framing is so important when you're talking about these kind of things. So rather than discipline, it's like I'm thinking long term rather than short term. What's
Yeah,
best for me long term and for the future of myself and those around me, as opposed to I'm punishing myself because I ought to be punished. It's like, no, you're thinking long term because you deserve to be thought about in the long term, and
it's like
I care about you.
that timeless saying of like short-term pain for long-term gain.
Yeah,
And we have
exactly.
to become more comfortable sitting with the feeling of being uncomfortable within ourselves.
Yeah, and not going to scrolling.
Oh, it's so hard to do sometimes, isn't it?
It is. It is. So for those listening, and is there anything you want to share? Any specific message you would like to leave behind to end this conversation?
My biggest message that I share constantly, and I've shared it already today, is the power of learning to forgive yourself for being in survival mode. We all make poor choices in life, and when we feel shame and blame attached to a choice that we've made, for whatever reason we did, it was for whatever was in our best interest at that time. It's that empowerment of learning to forgive yourself. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thanks so much for joining. I've included the links to all the things I could find of yours online, but if there's anything
Yeah.
you wanted to plug in now, so to speak, or to share, then feel free to do so.
Yeah, well, I guess my website for our non-for-profit charity is www.riseandthriveco.org.au, and you can see there, because we specialize in working with intervention, prevention, and recovery from the cycles of abuse and trauma. Yeah,
Awesome. That's a beautiful mission. Alrighty, well, thanks for joining,
thank
and
you.
hopefully I'll speak to you soon.
Done. See you soon.